Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar in our series with MFLA, the Mississippi Foreign Language Association. This is a summer webinar series that is entitled Empowering with Languages. And boy, do we have some powerhouses joining us for this series over the next 7 days. Our first webinar today is with Linda Egnatz, who is the Executive Director of the Global Seal of Biliteracy. But I'd love to invite you to join us for the webinars that we are having next week. It will be Monday through Friday, and then the following Monday on the 29th, every day at 2 p.m. These are free, and we have information posted on Facebook, on Twitter. You can reach out to us if you want to find out more about registering, or if you just want to visit that bit.ly link that you see at the bottom of your screen. I'll be adding that to the chat in just a few minutes. We would love for you to come and see us. We've got some great presenters, and I hope that we're just going to have a good time learning together over the next few days. So we are going to go ahead and we are going to get started. Today's title of our webinar today is Go Global, Empowering Language Learners with the Seal of Biliteracy. So this is a really timely webinar because so many of our learners right now are getting their seals of biliteracy. And so we're going to find out today what the difference is between the Global Seal and their state seal. And we'll talk specifically with Linda Egnatz about how they can go about doing that. So I am Dawn Samples. I am the director for Avant MORE Learning, and I am going to be your facilitator today. So I'm going to get to sit back and enjoy learning with the rest of you as we go through and hear Linda sharing with us today. And just so you know, MORE Learning stands for More Learning Opportunities Reaching Everyone. So we just want to be able to support everyone and give you some PD and some things you can go back to and learn from as we continue to move forward in these unprecedented times in education and in our society. Before we get started, I do want to just give you guys a little bit of information so that you'll know what's coming. And those of you who've been on some of our recent webinars, you already kind of know the routine. You will get a certificate of attendance from Avant MORE Learning. If you are in Mississippi attending this, you will want to reach out and speak with Edgar about being able to get your PDU credits through the University of Mississippi. I do believe that you will have to attend all of the webinars in this series to get the credits through them. And he has posted some information on the Mississippi Foreign Language Association's Facebook group. The link for that is right there, and I'll be putting that in the chat for you in just a few minutes also. I'm also going to share a link to the slide deck with you in the chat in just a few minutes. So if you want to follow along on your computers or access that later, you'll have access to it. And after our webinar today, you're going to have a little window pop up on your screen. And that window is going to give you some information about how to access the recording. Well, actually, the window you're going to get today is going to be the survey. The survey is just for us to get some feedback from you about your experience, a little reflection, see what ideas you have for other things you'd like to learn about. And also, when you click submit for that survey, you will have a link there where you can access your certificate. And that will just be for 1 hour to verify that you attended the webinar. You'll be able to download it and fill in your information. And you'll get an email tomorrow that will give you a link to a folder where you'll be able to access the certificate again if you need it. And you'll also be able to access any other materials or things that Linda has to share with you from the webinar today. So just know it's coming. If you are in attendance to the live webinar, you also have access to the chat. So you will be able to get that as well, okay? So be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with information about the webinars coming up. Be sure to tweet. We'd love to hear from you during the webinar today, but also all throughout the week. If you want to learn by following us on Twitter, use the hashtag #EmpoweringWithLanguages. That will help you be able to see kind of a stream of consciousness of all of our learning together. So I'd like to welcome today two very important people to help make this webinar run smoothly, and that is Michael Rains, who's the Instructional Associate Professor of TESOL and IEP at the University of Mississippi. He's also the Vice President of Programs for MFLA. Welcome, Michael. We're so glad to have you with us today. And I also want to welcome Edgar, who seriously, without Edgar, none of this would be possible. I've spent a lot of time with Edgar over the last few weeks getting ready for these webinars. He's a lecturer of Spanish at the University of Mississippi, and he is the MFLA Executive Director. So Edgar and Michael will be our Twitter and chat moderators, and they'll be reporting back from you throughout the webinar. So please share information, share ideas and resources, questions that you have. We want to be able to hear back from you throughout the webinar. So we'll be checking back in with them periodically. And our guest of honor today is Linda Egnatz, who's our Executive Director of the Global Seal of Biliteracy. As you all know, she's also the 2014 ACTFL Teacher of the Year, and she's a 2013 Golden Apple Teacher of Excellence. You can follow Linda. I'll be sharing this with you too, so don't worry. You can follow Linda on Twitter. You can follow her on Facebook, and you can follow the Global Seal. You'll have access to the webpage for the Global Seal, because she will be sharing a lot of information that you're probably going to want to look into after the webinar today. Make sure you also hashtag 2bylit to quit, so that any information about the Global Seal that has that hashtag you'll be able to see in your Twitter feed. Okay, so welcome, Linda. We are so happy to have you today. I'm going to just go ahead and let you know, the viewers, and Linda's going to be taking over in just a second. These are questions, the essential questions for today's webinar. We want you to be thinking about these kind of frame Linda's presentation for you. I will post these in the chat for you so that you can go back and be thinking of these. We'd love to hear your ideas around these questions, and we'd also love to know what kinds of things you would like to know more about with regard to these questions. So Linda, I am going to turn it over to you and let you take over. Let me make sure, there we go. So you can take it from here.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dawn. Thank you, Edgar and Michael. And I guess here we go. So start your Twitter chats, and that kind of gives us an idea where your questions are and how we might best serve you as we learn today. So I want to, I'm really excited to share this topic with you, and see, and that should be able to, and it doesn't look like, oh, there we go. So the first question we want to just kind of talk about, make sure that we all understand sort of the baseline, is really, what is a seal of biliteracy? And it seems, you know, we've got, so just kind of talk about the language first. Well, bilingual is really just that ability to communicate in speaking and listening. And we could talk about being multilingual, which would really be the goal, that we don't just have two languages, but that we have more than two. And there are some states that actually, in my neighboring state, I'm in Illinois, my neighboring state of Indiana actually has not a seal of biliteracy, but a certificate of multilingual proficiency. And there are some states, for example, the state of New Mexico, where we and Arizona, where we see some Native American languages that don't necessarily have a written form, that bilingual is really important to those states. But in most cases, we see a state where they're going to have a seal of biliteracy, which is what you have in Mississippi. And that's literacy is the idea of inclusive, not just of speaking and listening in terms of oral communication, but also of reading and writing, that element of literacy. And so we see all four of these terms that are being used, and you want to be able to explain them. Oftentimes you'll see one of the most asked about questions about the seal of biliteracy is, what is the difference between being bilingual and biliterate? And so you want to be able to answer those questions should an administrator or a parent ask you. So that's just sort of a foundation of that piece. And when we think about the state seals, and there are 39 states that have a state seal of biliteracy in some form, there's a lot of diversity. And so you can begin to see the diversity in just looking at their different symbols. These are only 25 of the 39 states, and each one is as unique in its program as it is in its symbol. And so we start to look at the seals themselves. Not all states call their program a seal. In some cases, it's a certificate or a certification. In some cases, it's not a seal or of any kind. It's actually just an endorsement that goes on the student's transcript. And so depending upon the state that you're in, the program could look very, very different. How the seal is also awarded differently from state to state. In some cases, the seal of biliteracy was a law that was passed by a legislature. In other states, it was just a program that was implemented through the Department of Education. In other cases, it's just actually a program that is opted into by a district following state guidelines. And so it's very unique. In most states, there is a determined level of proficiency that's determined by testing. But in other cases, that might be determined by, in some cases, in some states, through seat time. In other words, how many courses the student has had in the language, or through a GPA, a grade point average in the course that they take. In most states, that needs to be externally tested. In other words, the seal is given based on a test that is nationally, or a type 1 test given and recognized. But in some states, a test that's determined by a district or even by a school could be accepted. Many states use portfolios or accept portfolios, which are especially helpful if you have a less commonly taught language where there's less tests available. So that's another option that you sometimes see. And of course, a variety of tests could be used or accepted. So each state is a little bit different, including your own state of Mississippi. And so when we look at the seal of biliteracy, the most important thing to know about it, whichever form that it takes, is that it's important because it recognizes that someone has been certified with language skills in 2 or maybe more languages. And the reason why that's important is because it becomes a game changer for that learner. And when I learned first about the seal of biliteracy, there were only 2 states that had the seal. The only state that was really implementing it at the time was the first state, California. And I read about it as soon as the second state, New York, had just sort of adopted it. At that time, Governor Cuomo had signed an executive order, but it hadn't yet been implemented. But I saw it as a classroom teacher as that sort of magic answer that could be a real motivator to my classroom learners. Something that would connect the classroom learning with something that they could use in the real world to articulate their language skills to employers in layman's terms. So, and a student once really articulated that well for me when he told me that he had shared with his boss that he had gotten a really high score on his college advanced placement test in Spanish. He'd gotten a 4. And he told his boss, I got a 4 in my AP test. And his boss said, wow, I guess that's good. Then when he told his boss that he was going to get the state seal of biliteracy, and he got it through that same test score, his boss said, wow, you must be really, really good at Spanish. I'm going to give you a raise because you could probably talk to some of our customers now in Spanish. And so that the seal of biliteracy communicates in layman's terms about a kid or a student has a language skill. And it becomes that game changer, and we're seeing it through the research and through the data that students believe it is valuable, and it turns into motivation into classroom learning. And so that's the part that's really, really exciting. And so I wanted to kind of show you a little bit about from the Illinois law. I'm from the state of Illinois. We were the state number 3, because it pulls out in the purposes of the law some language that I think really helps pinpoint why we want to support the state seal of biliteracy, whatever state that they're in, and why we want to push for all 50 states to have one. And the terms that I think are most important are those in red. First of all, that yes, it does help employers identify people, not just with language skills, but at what level of language skills that they might have. So that's also important. But it provides universities with a way to identify and recognize applicants. So maybe they could identify someone that they want for their majors or their minors. It values foreign language as well as native language instruction, and it values diversity. So I think those are all things that are really important. It honors multiple cultures and languages that are within a community. So this is when you have a state government that's saying these things are important, that's something is valuable, something that we really want to support. Because for the very first time in our country's history, the seal of biliteracy is the first time government has said being bilingual is important, and it's an asset. And so we want to really support that, because that hasn't happened before. So why, if we have the state seals, why was the Global Seal created? The Global Seal was initially created as a gap filler. Having been a very large and still advocate of the state seals, I would receive calls and emails from those that were left out of the state seal programs. In most states that have a state seal, the program is still an optional one. It's not mandated, it's not required. A school district does not have to participate. In my state of Illinois, where we've had the state seal program now for going on 8 years, only 25% of the schools participate. So there are a lot of schools that are left out. In most states, private schools cannot participate. And the seal of biliteracy is only recognizing seniors in high school. And so a lot of students with language skills that could maximize those skills for opportunities are kind of left out. One of those groups of students are college students. So a college student who wants to articulate and their language skills for a job interview or on a resume doesn't really have a way to document those. And so that's one place where a seal of biliteracy would be useful. But for a lot of seniors in high school, when they don't receive that seal of biliteracy until that sort of last final semester or at graduation, that is, they don't have the opportunity to highlight that skill on early admission or on college applications or scholarship applications. And so that was another situation that we thought was something we could be able to sort of change through the Global Seal. And so there were a lot of different groups of people that we identified as being kind of left out of the formula. But the most important thing that we've discovered since that point was that by creating a pathway that didn't have age or time restrictions, we created an opportunity to motivate multiple points in time of acquisition of language. In other words, we created a tiered pathway where it wasn't just a one-time award. It was a pathway of awards or certificates where we're incentivizing the ongoing acquisition of language. So if, for example, a seal of biliteracy is only given to a senior at intermediate mid when they graduate, in a way, you're saying you won the race. But intermediate mid is the sort of entry point of functionality in language. There's several more levels to go to get really good at language. And so that's sort of the junior varsity getting off the bench to play the game, and yet you've given them an award and congratulated them, and they may feel as if they won the race and they're done. And so what we want to do is we want to create the idea that language is ongoing. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today in this sort of webinar. And so we have a 3-tiered pathway with 3 levels of awards at functional fluency, working fluency, and professional fluency. We want to create lifelong language acquisition. We wanted to be able to provide benefits to your Seal of Biliteracy. There are 5 states that include college credit for students attending their state universities with their with their state seals. And so Global Seal also created that opportunity for students. That's especially helpful for students that can't, that have a heritage language. Maybe some of our English language learners that have a heritage language that isn't offered in their high school, but they could get credit for their heritage language to take with them. We wanted to be able to provide, again, something for all learners, not just for the high school senior. Let's see, so this, all of a sudden, seems like I've lost, there we go. So what does it look like on the map? If we look on the blue map, we see these are the 39 states that have a state seal. So you see Mississippi here is blue. All of the blue states are those states where there is a seal of biliteracy, although again, it may not be called a seal. The yellow and green states are states that are in some part of that process. On the right is where you'll see where the Global Seal has been issued. The yellow states have applications in process. In other words, we don't have test scores yet, but we're waiting to issue those awards. But you'll also see that the Global Seal is actually global. We've issued awards working with the Department of Education in Mexico, in Germany, and just this last week, we issued our first awards in Japan. And so the idea of the Global Seal is extending, again, that opportunity to credential language skills in 2 or more languages in the same way, but without the ability to sort of cross state lines with uniform credentials. So what do the state seals of biliteracy look like if we map them by proficiency level? So if you look at the different sort of proficiency levels, we start over on the left, and we start with what some states refer to as not a particular ACTFL scale criteria, but what the state refers to in the state legislative code or in the state Department of Education guidelines as a body of evidence of proficiency. Now, the testing themselves may measure at intermediate mid in most of those states, but that the language of the guidelines says that the district has the determination of what body of evidence will they accept to measure proficiency. In most states, however, you'll see that they choose one of those proficiency levels on the ACTFL scale. In some states, you'll see that there's a number next to those initials. That means that the state has more than one level. So if you look for Mississippi, you'll notice that you have 2 levels. You have one at intermediate mid, and you have a second level, which will be, so your intermediate mid level is your silver. And then you have a gold level, which is at that sort of intermediate high to advanced low or above. That will be that sort of, that's going to be your gold level. And so the requirement will be a different set, a higher set of test scores for that higher level. And you'll see that that intermediate mid, which is that first level, is the most popular level across the country for most of the state seals. Above that line, you'll see that that's also where the Global Seal sets its first level of functional fluency. And so for any student that were to get a Global Seal or a Mississippi State Seal at the same level, they could, with the same test, actually receive both awards. So that's kind of a benefit. You can sort of layer on the awards, and we'll see that there's a number of schools that do that exact same thing. It also gives them the opportunity to continue to level up. So if you have a student who is in a dual language program, or began in middle school, or has a heritage language and is using the language at home, or did a study abroad, or just loves language learning and has some great skills, they graduate at above an intermediate mid-level, they could also be recognized at your Mississippi Gold level and graduate with a higher level award rather than just the lower level. So it's really exciting when a student has an opportunity with a carrot to sort of level up and work toward the higher level as well, and then be recognized for that. If you're listening and you're not from the state of Mississippi, or you want to know more about your own state seal, at the very bottom, you'll see that there is a website on the globalseal.com. We have a resource center page that has an interactive map. It's a yellow interactive map where you can click on your state, and it will give you a synopsis of what your state seal is about. It'll have some basic information. It'll show your logo if your state has one. It'll show the legislation or the law that was passed, and it will have links that will take you directly to your state's website or PDF information that's available. So it's a great resource if you're trying to find out more about your state or any other state's state seal information. And I think now it's time for a check-in.
Yes, thank you, Linda. So we've been pushing out information on Twitter and in the chat, trying to find out a little bit about what the experience has been from some of our viewers today. So Edgar, do you want to kick off and talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on Twitter?
Yes, hi everybody. Just very quickly, we are just seeing that people are just tweeting about how the seal is just basically a recognition to certify the language skills in 2 or more languages. We are trying to find out what type of language learners you have, how many intermediate meets do you have. So keep sharing on Twitter so we can hear more about it and can share with you all what's going on here in social media. So keep sharing on hashtag empowering with languages. Michael, back to you.
Hi, everyone. Dawn, Linda, there were several questions as far as what does this test require of the students? And also there's lots of interest and excitement about the Global Seal.
Well,
Yes,
great. We'll be talking, I know we'll talk about some of those tests. Dawn?
Yes, that's what I was going to say, is I think there is some question around that I think your experience would be invaluable to be able to talk to our listeners about. So we will turn it back over to you, Linda, and continue listening. If you haven't gotten on Twitter yet, make sure you follow along the hashtag empowering with languages hashtag, and that you also follow at Global Bilit Seal, so that you can also stay up to date with what Linda and her team are doing at the Global Seal of Biliteracy. Okay, Linda, back to you.
All right, thank you. Let's see here. Let's see that my screen is not, there we go. Now I want to go went back to. So our second question is, why should all bilinguals get their language skills tested, credentialed, and recognized? And that all includes you, teachers. And the reason why we want to think about all bilinguals getting their language skills tested, credentialed, and recognized is because, this is sort of my new soapbox, is because if we want language and being bilingual to be taken seriously, we really want to see everyone do it. When everyone begins to see language skills recognized and put on their resumes, on their CVs, on their LinkedIn profiles, when we see everyone being interviewed and your employer says, do you have a seal of biliteracy? Do you have a global seal? Here in Illinois, just this last week, it came up on our Illinois State Board of Education that students with a seal of biliteracy will have their will have their credentialing for bilingual certification for teacher education programs. And so we start to see these pieces when we start to take bilingualism seriously and it's credentialed, that becomes important. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that if you haven't yet been tested, then you don't really know from a personal experience, what is it like to be, what is the test like? And what is my own level of language skill? For a lot of us, if you're my age, certainly, I did not have to take a test when I got my degree and my teaching license. So I went right into the classroom without ever having been tested. Today's language educators have been tested before they go into the classroom, but it may have been a while since you've been tested. And if you haven't been abroad, if you haven't been regularly using your language, if you teach a lower level course, your skills might be a little bit rusty. And so it's really important for us, if we expect to get language students to higher levels of proficiency, that we know what our own level is. And we sort of set the example and become a model. And it would be really exciting if if we started to see that become the standard, that people were recognized as being bilingual, that was what everyone wanted to see on a resume. And so I think it's really important, and it can start with us as being role models. So collaboratively, if we take those with a seal of biliteracy, or whether it be a state seal or a global seal, and we look at the work that we can do collaboratively together as advocates to really change things that are for our students and for their futures, we can really become a society where being bilingual and multilingual is an asset, where someone is not looked down upon because they have an accent, where that is seen as a badge of honor because it means you speak another language. And so those are things that one thing that we can do. Another thing that we can do collaboratively together, and we know this from the data and the research, is that when you adopt a Seal of Biliteracy program, your retention in your program will go up, because it doesn't, typically in what happens in a language program is students take a language in high school for usually for 2 years because they think there's a mystical 2-year requirement to go into a 4-year college degree. So the program, they take the high school language coursework just as a checkoff to get into college. They don't take it for the language purpose, they take it for the college entry requirement purpose. And so there's no buy-in to learning the language, there's buy-in to getting a passing grade to get out of the course. And so when someone has that Seal of Biliteracy as the goal, as opposed to the college checkoff requirement, then they have a 3 or 4 year coursework in line. And I not only just sit in the class to get by, I sit in the class to acquire language, because I know there's also a proficiency test at the end of that coursework. So it's really changes the dynamic of the class. And what that does is it also grows learner proficiency, and the speed of acquisition changes. It creates a pathway for lifelong acquisition when we create these sort of gamified benchmark learning sequences. So that's another exciting piece. And when students start getting excited about language learning, what we saw with a lot of our Seal of Biliteracy recipients, and I see now with several of them now as adults, is they start acquiring 3rd and 4th languages. So that's another thing that we start to see. They can become Seal of Biliteracy recipients, become multilingual adults, which is also really exciting. It provides universities with a way of identifying and really attracting potential languages majors and minors, because they come to you already with a high level of skill, especially when you can provide some attractive scholarships or advanced placement opportunities for those students. It formalizes and standardizes the role of bilinguals. We talked about that a little bit, and provides employers with a way to identify language skills through documentation. And lastly, especially through what we've just seen happening around the United States in just these last recent months and weeks here, is it values affirms the value of diversity and honors cultures within our communities. And I think that's an incredibly important piece. So why get a seal of biliteracy? It's a way to provide proof, whether it's to an employer or an academic institution, not just that you have bilingual skills, but the level of your skill that has been verified through external testing. And that's the really important piece. And in whether it is a state seal or the global seal, that is 2 languages. And in the United States, one of those languages must be English, with the exception of the state of Hawaii. Hawaii is a state that has 2 official languages. Hawaiian is one of those, English is the other. So if I'm in Hawaii, I could get my seal of biliteracy in Hawaiian and German, for example. So one of the other benefits to the seal is that it motivates language learners. And I've had opportunity to be in some bilingual classrooms and dual language classrooms for young children. And I love being around little kids, because when you ask a question, whether they know the answer or not, all of the hands go up. They just love to participate. As a high school teacher, sometimes my classroom might have been a little bit more like this when I asked the question, if they weren't quite sure. And a lot of times as a teacher, that's what we're worried about. We want to, like, what is it that I can do to motivate my learners? How do I get them excited about what I have instead of nervous? And one of the things that we deal with right now is something we talk about with this Generation Z, we call them, is they have a lot of anxiety. In fact, a lot of these students are being diagnosed with anxiety disorders, and in some cases even taking medication because of it. And so one of the things that we need to think about with languages is what's going to be such a strong motivator that they will be able to set aside some of those anxieties. And I think in recent months, with the COVID-19, we had even more challenges to engage learners. Some of you are teaching online. And so one of the quotes that I really like is from Parthena Dragic. She is one of our Seal of Biliteracy, our Global Seal of Biliteracy teachers. She's a department chair from Naples Community School in Florida. And she's also the author of TAMUS, which is an AP language program for both French and Spanish. And she said she knew that the Global Seal was working for her students, which are in a private school that could not participate in the State Seal program in Florida, because she said that when she came back in the fall, her students were asking about their STAMP test scores because they wanted to know what they had to do to shift so that they could level up and go from the silver level, or our functional fluency certificate for the Global Seal, because they wanted to be able to get to the next level before they graduated the following year. So it was really exciting. They're very cognizant of their scores and what different skill areas that they needed to work on to change. And that was incredibly exciting for me as a teacher, because I saw the same thing in my classroom when students said, like, they became very aware of where their skills were, their strengths, as well as their weaknesses that they needed to work on. And they never did that for a test. They never said, well, I'm going to, it was more, but the seal was a big piece. And we also see the same thing happening in the research. I participated with Kristen Davin, who's done a lot of research with the Seal of Biliteracy. And we did a study of 3 different school districts in Illinois that were in different phases of adopting the Seal of Biliteracy, and looked at successes and challenges. And we interviewed a number of high school seniors, some that were in world language programs, some that were English language learners, and some that had not taken language at all. And the questions were asked about the Seal of Biliteracy. And one of those was, do you think that it would be a benefit? And if so, in what way would it benefit you? Notice that about 80%, 75 to 80% talked about they thought the benefit was in the career area. Some of them thought it would help with college credit. Only, a few thought it was going to be, would help with their grades. Grades were not the motivator for students. It was connecting a Seal of Biliteracy with the future, and the future was dollars and career and job. In fact, one of the students actually said this quote. He said, "It gives you a motive to finish. It's about retention." Before I was like, why am I in this class? In other words, it connects what happens in the four walls or virtual walls in some cases of your classroom with the real world and what's important for the student with what comes after high school. And so that was really important. And it was a big lesson that we learned. Another piece that we saw from the research is it does change and impact retention. In fact, we saw in the school districts that were adopting state seals that they would see an upper level and advanced placement program increase of almost from 30% to almost double within about 2 years. We also see this in a district in Kentucky where it's a single school program in a state that doesn't actually even have their own state seal, but the school district has adopted a seal program. In Fayette County, they saw a 33% increase in their high school language program after adopting a district seal. Parents want students involved in programs where they see the student getting an advantage or a certificate or something that's going to distinguish that student in the future. So there's a great deal of buy-in on these programs. For administrators and parents, even in people in the community, an AP program is highly attractive because it impacts the actual school report card scores of college readiness. And so when you double an AP, the number of students that are enrolled in college advanced placement programs in a high school, you are impacting that school district's college readiness scores, which impacts their school report card, which actually impacts things like real estate sales and so on. And so those are things that that high school administrators are very interested in, languages, when you begin to do things like that. So high school students also are going to value the seal. These are just some of the reasons why public schools have chosen to couple their state seal program with a global seal that they can award earlier as a benchmarking tool. In other words, as soon as the students qualify through benchmarking testing. In other words, if you wait until just the senior year to give the qualifying test for the state seal, the program becomes a pass-fail. In other words, the student takes the test at the end of the senior year and they either get their state seal or they don't. If you can provide an opportunity for students to test before their senior year, it gives them feedback. They know if they're on track and on target. They know where their strengths are, and they also know if there's a weak area that they need to be paying attention to improve so they don't miss out on their state seal opportunity. At the same time, they might qualify for another award earlier. In other words, in Mississippi, if you have an intermediate state seal award, your silver award, they might qualify for the silver award, but realize they're not that far away from the gold award, and they might just step up their game and take another year of language so that they can get there. But in the meantime, you could provide as an earlier level award a global seal so that the students could use that global seal earlier for things like early admission for a college, for scholarship opportunities, or for early college credit. And that's what these students have all done. An example for Annabella, she got her working fluency in Chinese or in Spanish rather, and her functional fluency in Chinese, and she was waitlisted for Cornell University. So when she got her Global Seal Awards, she actually called the university, let them know about her awards, and the next day she got her full acceptance letter via email. And so students are using these awards to get things that are important to them. And that's part of what we need to help as teachers to do, is don't just provide the student with an award or a certificate, but really help the student articulate what will you be able to do with this, and give them the tools and the language to help them communicate to others, whether it's the college or an employer, what can you do with the certificate? In other words, let's turn the trophy into a tool that students can use to help themselves stand out and demonstrate their language skills to others. Parents are also interested in a state or a global seal because it can save them dollars. One of the ways it can do that is through competency-based testing. This is especially important for our English language learners that may have a home language that isn't even taught in a high school. If a student does not have, for example, our English language learners that may be taking extra English courses at the high school level and may not be able to take a world language course, that might preclude them from being able to enter a 4-year university program that has a 2-year language requirement. So competency-based testing allows them to be able to get a high school credit for their language. So that's an important reason why you might, but it could also save some money. Advanced placement. If you have a test in place that tells a university your level of skill through a state or a global seal, that because that's aligned to the actual requirements, it's something that college, university language placement programs would understand. In fact, many of the tests that are used for the global seal or the state seal are those used in universities. They might be, that placement is going to save money. And for those that do use the global seal, we actually have a program in place with transferable college credit through Southern New Hampshire University. I really like the quote from the student who said, who was actually one of my students in this particular case, who had planned on dropping out because he had his 2-year required credit, and then he heard about the State Seal of Biliteracy, and that, you know, there was some scholarship maybe opportunities that might come with that. And he decided to stick around, and he stayed all 4 years and got his Seal of Biliteracy. So you never know what it is that will compel a student to continue coursework. So the Seal of Biliteracy is a pretty good carrot for that purpose. I mentioned the English language learners and competency-based credit. It really is an important piece. In fact, a study was done by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Washington State with their State Seal of Biliteracy program. And the study determined that 21% of those English language learners students would not have graduated without that competency-based credit. That was especially important because it served as that elective credit that was required for them to either graduate on time or to actually graduate at all. And a large number, about a third of those students, were Spanish heritage speakers. College students, we mentioned that college students qualify for the Global Seal, and they don't qualify for a state seal. So this is a different group of students who could now get a language credential that's really useful for them as they go out into the workforce, have a way to document their language. We provided global seals to about 234, I believe it was, students last year from the University of Oregon. One of those was Ana Barajas, who got a global seal working fluency, that's at advanced low, in French and Italian. And she did a piece for public service radio. And she talked about how it really helped with her employers. But even at working fluency, she was still excited about an ongoing language pathway for herself. And she was ready to work for the next level. She said she couldn't wait to do her study abroad to find out how much more language she was going to acquire as a result of her study abroad. When you have benchmark pathways with sequential certificates and awards, it's gamifying language, and students are excited to see what else they can do and how much more they can acquire. And so you want, one way to do that is through this ACTFL piece. It's a downloadable poster for free from the ACTFL website called Oral Proficiency Levels in the Workplace. And you can connect these right up to your award. Remember, the Mississippi Seal of Biliteracy starts at the same place as the Global Functional Fluency at intermediate mid. And you can talk to students, is this the kind of career you want? Or would you rather look at some of these words, like a nurse or a teacher or a police officer or a receptionist, or, you know, do you want to work in sales? Then you need to aim for the advanced low, the working fluency, or the gold level of the Mississippi State Seal. And you begin to help students set goals for themselves for their language targets, and help them begin to sort of plan what they want to do for their language. Build awareness of what the job market looks like. This study was done last year through Ipsos Studies and ACTFL, and they looked at what were those languages that employers wanted. And we begin to see that the highest 5 sort of jobs market areas were in customer service, sales, marketing, that employers were saying they lost customers because they could, and markets because they didn't have bilinguals, that 9 out of 10 said that was increasing over the next 5 years. And so as you work with your students, you want to help them articulate how will they use their tool, how will they use their Seal of Biliteracy in the future. You'll want to add it to your resume. Don't add it as an award, add your seal as a certificate. It represents a skill. It's just like a plumbing license. It says something that you know how to do. It's a skill and a credential that you have. For those with a global seal is a serial numbered certificate. So it actually fills in under licenses and credentials on LinkedIn, and actually pops up with a logo and everything when you enter it in onto your LinkedIn profile. And so we want to, again, to begin to standardize that if you're a bilingual in the United States, you document it on your work papers. And so think about pay differentials. This is a great way to motivate students to acquire language and to continue retaining language and working toward their seals of biliteracy, because there are a number of careers where it pays to be bilingual. Police officers often get a stipend of either a percentage or a dollar figure a month more if they are bilinguals. The same thing happens in government and social services. In the medical field, for example, this is on ZipRecruiter. If I enter in the average salary for a nurse, it came up this last month at about $70,000 a year. And the American Nursing Association says there's a pay differential. Nationwide, they said it was about 7%. So when I entered in bilingual nurse on ZipRecruiter, I found out that it was about $15,000 more a year. Well, I thought maybe I should change careers. That was a great idea. Yeah, this is something that speaks to parents on open, you know, when you have that sort of back to school night, when you talk about why do you want your students to take 4 years of language? This is why. And so we begin to have those conversations about why is it important that your students get a seal of biliteracy. Time for a check.
Okay, everybody, let's check here with Twitter on what is going on today. So basically what we are seeing is that some people are teaching heritage speakers. And I think, Linda, that highlights what you were talking about, the value of cultures, and highlighting what, honoring that culture that they are bringing into the classroom, and also recognizing those skills that those people have. They are also talking about how the Global Seal of Biliteracy also helps language to go to take the language courses to a different level. And I think that is very important. Another one is there was a question there, and it was asking, how can one link biliteracy to translation studies? That's probably a question that you could answer in a minute. We are also seeing how powerful really is to be have biliteracy. Here in the state of Mississippi, we have about more than 400 international companies. So really we can see the impact that having a different languages could really have into our economy. So really, I think it resonates that it pays to be bilingual. Michael, what are you seeing over there on the chat room?
I'm seeing a super amount of interest, that's for sure. Lots of questions, lots of comments. One of the themes has been about heritage schools, like middle school students. How early should you start talking about the seal with middle school? Students from Puerto Rico, can they test independently? And also lifelong adult learners, what can they do to test it independently? That's been several themes throughout this.
Great. Well, that's where we're headed next. So we'll talk about implementation, and actually, this is the sort of short end of the piece. And a lot of the questions can be answered on our website as far as some of this testing pieces. But I'll take you here in terms of engaging and accelerating that, and what that implementation piece looks like. So thank you. So here we go. Let's see. Or there we go. Sometimes it seems like it's slow to respond.
Yes, sometimes there's a little bit of a lag after you
I've hit
break.
it like 3 times. Come on.
Okay, let me make sure you have access here. Whoop.
Here we go. So just the idea, like, okay, what makes it worth playing? Well, because we can win. That's why. These happen to be, these are from Missouri, the state of Missouri, and this is a school that does both programs. Again, the State Seal of Biliteracy alongside of the Global Seal. So they maximize opportunities for learners, and we'll kind of see what that looks like. This was my big aha from my own personal story in my classroom. This is from the Avant performance piece, and you see where it's talking about how long it takes to become, to get to WIT level. And I was in a typical 9 to 12 program, which says that they might maybe get to intermediate, maybe in 4 years. But when Illinois adopted its State Seal of Biliteracy, come on, pop up. Oh, it's being, there we go. It was, our level is intermediate high in the state of Illinois. So basically when Illinois passed its State Seal at intermediate high, they basically told me my kids will never get there. And I said, uh-oh, that can't be. They have to get there. We have to do something. But that meant I had to make a paradigm shift. And the shift was the carrot. What was the carrot? The seal really became that carrot. And so when we look at that, these were the first students, my students that got Illinois' first State Seal of Biliteracy in our pilot test year. And they did it not because the data said that they could, they did it because they wanted it. So we became partners together because they wanted change. So they made changes in their behavior, and then we had to work it out together. But it is possible. This last year in Illinois at intermediate high, in spite of what that data and that chart says, it's over almost 8,000 students at intermediate high got their State Seal of Biliteracy. In Missouri, which is an intermediate mid-state like the state of Mississippi, last year 421 students. Your neighboring state also at intermediate high, like Illinois, your neighboring state of Louisiana last year reported 404 students. So it is possible. Your students can get there, and all we have to do is work together. And so that we want to be able to think about how do we do that. And one of those is just the idea of you set the goals. And so that question came up about how do you do that? We do create the pathway, and one of the things we learned from our research was that students, those seniors that they interviewed, they said, we wish we would have known sooner. We dropped out before we found out about the seal. We found out as a senior, and we dropped out after our sophomore year. So you in Mississippi have a document that says you start the pathway in 7th grade. You start telling them early. And that's what we found to work as well. The earlier students know about the program, the better. but also early testing and benchmark testing is also successful. The city of Chicago, which has 2/3 of their state seal recipients are English language learners, current or former, is successful because they start benchmarking testing at the end of elementary school. They said they have awards at 5th grade and at 8th grade, as well as at 12th grade for their English language learners. And the reason why they do that is because they want them to be planning ahead. They want them to know that what they have to do to support their heritage language at home, because that heritage language may not even be offered in their school programs. And so on the right, you see that 7-step piece. That comes from your Mississippi document, that the student would be notified in the 7th or 8th grade about the program. And that you meet together and describe what, to the student or have open meetings about what those world language and English language requirements are going to be. And that's why pathway testing is also important. We don't want it to be, oh, pass, fail test at the end. Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't make it. You want the student to have some feedback ahead of time so they know if they're on target or not, so that they have time to get better. And if they don't know where they are on that pathway or that proficiency scale until the end, it would be too late. And that would be a travesty, because these seals can really impact their opportunity. And so that brings us to that question of testing. There are a number of tests that are pretty popular across the country for most of the state seals. They're the same kinds of tests we use for the Global Seal. And the Global Seal, we have a test page on our website called Qualifying Tests. Most states, in your Mississippi document as well, you have a document that lists the tests, and there'll be a chart where the test score that qualifies for the program and which award you would qualify for. Each state does something similar, and that's those links to those documents are on that test page, so you'll see that there. One of the other things that you're going to see on each test page would be some kind of extra information in some cases of, how do you qualify for that? If you're looking for a test in one of those smaller languages on the Global Seal page, we also have a, how do I find my test for my language? So we have, the Global Seal can credential in over 100 languages. So you click on your language and we will provide you with not only a list of the tests that we qualify, that are also qualified by a number of states in those languages, but those are also hot linked to those test companies. So you can go and get information from the test companies about the tests that that is in those languages. And so what does the test kind of look like? If it's a proficiency test like this one happens to be the Avant assessment stamp test. It has 4 different components, those 4 skills. And that's an important component for students because they have strengths and they have weaknesses. And it's nice to know that you have some, you're good at something because you're maybe not good at everything. And after they get the test, they're going to get a score report. And you'll notice that the score report shows that this student had some strengths and also had some weaknesses. And that's where the teacher's role of coaching can help them, because they have to get to the base level of the requirement in all 4 skill areas. But that's powerful, because here's where gamification happens. You'll notice on the left is an Apple report. That's also a 4-skill report, the Apple test, the stamp test, again, you see. But what we've noticed with Global Seal, we've looked literally at thousands of score reports, and we find that there's, the student generally has their highest level skill is almost always 2 sub-levels higher than their lowest skill. What that means is by the time that the student gets to the baseline, qualifies in all 4 skill areas, they already are at the next highest, the next certification, the next award level in at least one of their skill sets, maybe 2. and they're halfway there in another. So the student doesn't see themselves at the skill level they just received. They actually see themselves, well, I would have gotten that one except for that one score. And so it gives them the idea of, I'm going to level up because I just can take, if I take one more year, then I'll get to the next level because I'm already halfway there. And that's when gamification happens. So that's the exciting part. We saw this with Albuquerque Public Schools. Where over the course of last year, 11% of their students leveled up from functional fluency to working fluency in 1 year. So that was a real exciting piece. We saw that happen. So this is that process to see how can they move from one level to the next by offering that benchmark stepping stone. And what's really exciting because the Mississippi and the Global Seal, if you would like to line them both, one test can meet both requirements. So one test and 2 simultaneous awards. If you're interested in the Global Seal, the question came up about heritage schools. We service a lot of community-based heritage schools. We also do the college students. We do offer individual testing. Individual testing and certification is a little bit more that they're not purchasing through a school, so there's a little bit more cost involved because there's a remote proctor service that's included in that. But individual testing and certification is possible. It's not hard to do. So there's an online application for the individual or for the school. There is the test that needs to be taken. And then the process for the Global Seal, just like your state seal, is free. There's no charge and there's not even a shipping cost. And the certificates with the embossed seals are sent to the school or to the individual, if it's an individual test, completely free of charge. Our goal is to credential language users. And just in closing, whether it's a state seal or a Global Seal program, you need promotion. That's the other big takeaway from the research. Remember, students said, I didn't know. So you want to maximize it. For the Global Seal, we have free resources online. We actually have a medallion with information you can post that's all ready to go on your school's website. We credential with. We have posters, we have implementation guides and other pieces that and brochures you can share with parents. So finally, in closing, before we do our last Twitter chat, my last sort of mantra, celebrate what you want to duplicate. If you make it big, because then people will want to be a part of the fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. I think you've given our viewers a whole lot of food for thought and some ideas about how to go about doing this. Let's check in with Edgar and Michael one more time. Edgar, would you like to report out first?
Yes, I think what we are talking about, the importance of knowing where the students' art is resonating out there and how it really helps for them to get clear goals to know where they need to be going. And also how the Global Seal can really take this, strengthen the state level seal by offering a path in the college arena, where the college students can also be awarded the Seal of Biliteracy. Michael?
There were several questions having to do with if different states require different proficiency levels and students move to different states, would that not cause confusion? And also there was a question about, for the Global Seal of Biliteracy, if a student takes the STAMP or AAPPL test in the state, for the state seal, does that automatically apply to the Global Seal? And do they have to take it again or only under the Global Seal?
So for the first question, it does cause confusion to universities because what one state seal doesn't represent the same qualifications as another state seal. So there is some issues. In fact, our website's used by a lot of universities when they're trying to figure out what does one state seal mean when a student is coming, which is one of the reasons why the Global Seal does have that sort of universal criteria. However, if a student knows what their state seal criteria is, then a lot of university can take that criteria, what they, intermediate mid or intermediate high, and hopefully then provide that sort of placement. So, but it certainly does mean something, but it does differ from state to state. So it's not, if they're going to a state university, obviously, then the state university would hopefully know something, a little bit more concrete. As to your second question, the Global Seal recognizes the same tests oftentimes as the state, so a student doesn't need to take a second test. The Global Seal also honors a test up to 12 months. So if a test has been taken in the last 12 months, that test could be submitted for Global Seal certification.
So, Linda, I think this is your charge to us.
Yes, it is. Make it for me.
So be the game changer. Go out there and advocate. Linda's given us a lot of ideas about information and data that we can use to advocate for our programs so that we can build proficiency in our students. She's given a lot of resources for where you need to go to look to find out more. Obviously, you're going to want to check out her website, the Global Seal of Biliteracy. We've shared all that information with you. It's in the slide deck. It's also, if you check out hashtag empowering with languages on Twitter, you'll find a lot of the things there that you can just click on and go from there. But I would like to say, Linda, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all this information. It's so much good data, good advocacy information for us to improve our programs and what we offer our learners. Before we go today, I do want to just give you guys a reminder that you are going to get a survey. I posted a link to the survey in the chat, but also when you leave the Zoom today, before you click out of everything, after you hit leave, a window will be there that's a Zoom window, and there will be a link there for you to click on so that you can fill out our post-webinar survey. This is an opportunity for you to give feedback to our presenters and our partners. It's also a way for us to find out what you would like to do or have more of in terms of professional learning. You will also receive an email tomorrow. In that email, there will be a link to the survey in case you miss it today, don't worry. And there will also be a link to a folder with some materials. There's some materials that you only are able to get access to if you attend the webinar live. And you will have access to the chat if you want any ideas or things that were shared there. So just make sure that you check those things out, that you look for them. Go check out Twitter and our hashtag empowering with languages all week over the next 7 days or 7 work days, because we are going to be using that hashtag for all of the webinars. So just don't forget to do that. You've got our information to follow on social media. We put that in the chat for you, so you'll have access to that. Just follow along and learn with us all week. I would also like to just say thank you to Edgar and Michael for being our chat and Twitter facilitators today. Thank you so much for engaging our participants today, you guys.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you to Avant, and thank you, Linda, and also thank you to the Department of Modern Languages at the University of Mississippi. And thank you all who came and share with us and learn a little bit more about the Global Seal of Biliteracy.
So we are going to leave you today, and we hope that you will join us on Monday, same time, different link place. Make sure you check us out on social media to register for Monday's webinar. Monday, we'll be hearing from the Mississippi Department of Education. They will be sharing with us specifics regarding the Seal of Biliteracy and how you guys can access that information to find out more to get your students to seal in the state of Mississippi. So make sure you join us there. I am Dawn Samples. I'm from Avant MORE Learning, and that is all our time for today. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Is that it, Edgar?